All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the fourth webinar in our series on all aspects of the National Trauma Research Repository. All of our webinars are recorded and made available on demand on the center website, as well as the NTRR site that is hosted by NIH. You do not need an account to access them there. You can find them under Get Started and the Videos tab. We're really happy and appreciate you taking the time to learn how to use this free resource to help grow it for the benefit of the investigator community and ultimately for improved outcomes for trauma patients. We have a couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone is muted for now. If any questions come to mind during Nick's presentation, please post those in the chat. We'll monitor that and raise those questions at the start of the Q&A portion of the webinar. And at that time, we'll unmute everyone to allow for additional questions you may want to just pose yourself. If you do, please raise your hand, and that will give us the cue that you are ready to ask your question, and we'll go in order. Today, our presenter is Nick Medrano. Nick is our NTRR operations manager. He spent the last 2+ years working with dozens of subject matter experts to identify and specify common data elements for the data dictionary. And he's now responsible for facilitating the data submission and the data access functions for users of the system to ensure that they have a smooth experience. He works with his counterparts at NIH to ensure interoperability with the FITBUR information system, which is the TBI registry. He'll be your guide today through the details of the Datastore component of the repository. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nick.
Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate it. As Michelle stated, this is our fourth webinar in our series, and today we'll be navigating what's called the Datastore. I did want to start by going over some of our previous webinars. There's a QR code that will send you directly to the site where you can watch all of them. But I did want to go over kind of what topics were covered during those. Webinar 1 mainly looked at what the different NTRR account types are and different use cases for the NTRR. So those mainly being the data access or data submission types of accounts. And then we also went really in depth into how do you actually go through the process of creating an account. We'll delve a little bit back into that today, but if you have, maybe further questions, of course you can ask them, but this is also a great resource for understanding that process of how you get an account. Webinar 2, we looked at the modules that make up the system as a whole. The system used something called the BRICS infrastructure, which is a NIH developed cloud-based software for housing this data. We went over the different module functions as well as how the overall system works together. And then our last webinar, we specifically looked at the data submission process, but we looked at it for only one of the data environments, that being the data repository. So we have two different environments in the NTRR, the data repository, as well as what I'm going to talk about today, the data store. The data repository is used for data sets that have aligned themselves with the NTRR data dictionary or the common data elements that exist in the NTRR, while the data store that I'll be talking about today is used for slightly different data sets. So if you're interested in learning more about the data repository, we had a whole deep dive in our last webinar. So the agenda for today, we'll be going through the new NTRR module called the Datastore. We'll be looking at data that's currently available in that environment, as well as other data sets that we have in the pipeline. And then I'll have a demo of both the process of accessing data from the Datastore, as well as submitting data. So we'll go through kind of all of the steps regarding which documents you need to fill out, as well as going into the actual NTRR and showing you in the system what that looks like. So the data store is a new module. For those of you who have attended our previous webinars, we have referenced this environment called the Metastudy environment. and that Metastudy environment has now been renamed the Datastore. However, the functionality and use cases have remained exactly the same. So because this environment is being used for more than just holding meta studies, our NIH colleagues have decided that it would be good to kind of rename it to something that better represents what data is going to be there. So this environment houses data from already completed or what we call legacy studies. Um, or studies that did not use the common data elements from the data dictionary in the NTRR. So many of these studies have already been completed before the NTRR even existed, but we're still interested in making that data publicly available for other researchers to analyze. So that's where this type of data would live in the data store. The other type of data would be meta-analyses that are from aggregated data pulled from the data repository. So in the data repository, you have the ability to query data sets and aggregate them and then conduct further analyses. And the idea is that the data store would then house that data. Um, so that is the data store. And today we'll be talking about first, what type of data is in there now and what type of data is in the pipeline to get added. Um, on the top, we have studies that have already been added that are available currently. If you would like to analyze them, access them, those are listed on the top. And then on the bottom, we have 3 studies that are going to be added to the data store, as well as then 2 studies that are actually in the pipeline to get data to the repository itself. So that other environment. The 2 on top here, the Mimic study by Dr. Brian Eastridge, as well as Dr. Mold Millman's teams out in Colorado, the C3 network. Those 2 studies are in the pipeline to be added to the data repository, while we have 3 studies down here at the bottom are in the pipeline for getting submitted to the data store, which we'll be talking about today. We do have here on the right-hand side a QR code as well as just the URL for where this list is kept, as well as in a few minutes, I'll be showing you the site and I can show you what type of information is provided for these studies. Again, this being on the public site, something that anyone has access to. So how do we go about accessing these data sets? First, we would need to determine which data sets would you like to have access to for analysis. Step 2 would then be submitting a data access request form shown here on the right-hand side. We covered this a bit in webinar 1 regarding creating an account. So the information that goes along with this data access request would be the requester information, a project summary, as well as IRB approval. So you would fill that out and submit that. Once you gain access to the system, then you would log into the system and then you'd be able to access the study documentation. So this could be things like the study protocol, data dictionaries, code books, as well as the data itself. And then finally, there in the system, you can then select which of these documents you would like to download locally to your device. You can send these to a separate tool where you then can then download them to your computer. So it's a very, very straightforward process, but and as Michelle stated at the beginning, we're here to make it as easy as possible for you to get access to it and be able to analyze these data sets. So with that, I'm going to jump into a quick demo going through this process for, once again, accessing the data. I'm going to start by just going to the NTRR site. So I'll actually throw it in chat, ntrr.nih.gov. And once on the NTRR homepage, this is the public site that anyone has access to, you can go to data, and submitted data is where you could find a list of all the data sets that exist in the NTRR. So if you go to submitted data, we have 2 different environments, as I've mentioned. We have the repository studies and then the data store studies. As you can see, the repository studies is blank at this moment because this system has just gone live here in the last year or so. And as you know, you researchers know, it takes quite a bit of time to conduct research and then compile it and submit it. So this is currently blank. We have two in the pipeline to be added here. And then here you could go to data stores and you can see the list of data sets that are in the system and available for download. You can see some basic information here regarding who the investigator is, what the project title is, who they were working with. And then if you go into one, let's go into this Dr. Duchesne's here. Then you can see a little bit more information about this study and determine, is this something you'd be interested in gaining access to or further analyzing. So you can look at things like the abstract, the aims of the project, publications, as well as summary data. So this will give you an idea of, hey, this is a study that I'd really like to look a little bit closer at their data or maybe do a different analysis than what they completed. And the idea is that this then is, as these studies get added in the repository, this table gets updated. You can come back and see, are there new data sets that you might be interested in accessing? So that's step one, is identifying the data set. Step two then would be submitting a data access request for that data set. If you go to get started and get an account here, this again is what kind of we covered in webinar number one, is this in-depth process, but I did just want to show you that that document that you'll need to fill out is right here. It's step three, data access form or data submission form. And that document looks something like this. Go here to the top. So as mentioned in previous webinars, or if we have any new members here, we have the NTRR, the National Trauma Research Repository, as well as the FIPR research informatics system that Michelle mentioned. Essentially, this is a TBI specific repository that's been live for a little bit over a decade. And the Department of Defense determined that they'd like to have another repository that isn't just specific to TBI. So these two repositories coexist together. So you're able to aggregate data sets across the two repositories. So because of that, you'll see a lot of co-branding on our things like our data access requests. This is essentially going over the data use agreement as well as some information security best practices for ensuring that you're handling the data properly. And then if we go down to the bottom of the document is where you would then fill out information regarding who's requesting this data, as well as what you're interested in doing with the data when you get it. So you can fill out which repository you're interested in gaining access to, who's the data accessor. It could be the PI, or I know a lot of PIs have, data managers and data analysts that are going to be the ones who would be going through this process. So it could be someone different. And then you'll put here a brief kind of description of what are you interested in accessing and what are you interested in doing with that data. So you do need to get IRB approval for this access request, just to ensure that your institution is on board with you conducting this type of research. And then you do need to get a signing official to sign off that agrees that, yes, this looks good. We agree with what this researcher is interested in doing. And then you do have the ability, this is kind of something newer that we didn't cover during webinar one. This is a new addition to this form, which is the ability to add other users. So if you have, let's say, a large research team and you're interested in many users potentially gaining access to this data, but all for the same purpose, you can add then those users here. The only stipulation is that other users here would need to be from the same institution. If you had users that were from another institution, they'd have to fill out their own data access request. At the top, it would be identical in terms of what the summary is and what the aims are, but it would need to be for that particular user from that other institution. So this would then, you'd go through the submission process. Again, that would be what we covered in webinar one, being this getting started with NTRR, getting an account. You'd submit that through this process here. And then when you do have an account, let me log back in here nice and fresh. As you see, security, right? If I leave it unattended for even just a few minutes, it logs me out. So let me go ahead and just log back in here. And then I can show you how you can actually access the data in the system. So this is the landing page for the NTRR. As you can see, it still has that kind of FITBR graphic here as well because these two systems live together. Um, from this homepage, we'll be going today in the data store. Here are all the different modules that we talked about last webinar. So we'll be going into the data store. And you can see here, here are the data sets that are available in the data store. If you look on the left-hand side, you can see the resources. Right now, we're just looking at NTRR studies that are in the data store, but you could also filter by adding in FIPRA as well if you, let's say, wanted to do a cross aggregate data sets and do a larger analysis, you could do that as well. We're going to keep it simple for today and just look at the NTRR. And let's just jump into this first data set here. Let's say that this data set here is the one that you were interested in accessing. Impact of time to surgery on mortality in hypotensive patients with non-compressible torso hemorrhage. Once again, a study by Dr. Duchesne out of Tulane. So we could go into this data set. It's going to give this overview of an abstract about what this data set is about, as well as these aims. From there, we can go into the documentation. Actually, I do want to mention that each data set does get a unique DOI. So any accessor is required to then cite this DOI in publications. We can then go to documentation. And here we can see all of the documentation related to this study. So we have the actual data collection tool that was used, the data dictionary and code book, as well as then the study protocol. So those are listed under documentation. And then if we wanted to look at the data, that's going to live under the data tab. So if we wanted to get all the information for the study so that we can make sure we're analyzing it correctly and understand the data properly, what we can do is we can select these documents here, and we're going to do something called add to download queue. And this is going to send it over to a tool that's going to allow us to download all of these documents bundled together. So let's call this impact to time test, or actually just call it docs. Impact to time docs. And it says that those are going to get sent over to that queue. And then once you're a user, you're also going to get an email that says that, hey, those documents have been bundled for you and they're ready for download. So that is the documents. And then very easily we can go to data and repeat that process, selecting both of the data sets, add to the download queue, impact of time, data test. Save. Same thing, it's going to get sent to that environment where you can then download it all bundled up. So you can just hit OK. And then now we're going to go back just to the main page. We can go home or we can go to tools. Either way is fine. I like just going back to home where we can see the whole list of all of the different modules. From there, we can go to tools. And at the very top left, which is going to be the most used tool in the repository, is the download tool. So there's a quick guide here. So if you need a refresher or you're someone who just learns more from reading through documentation versus me showing you in this format, by all means, you use this tool here that we provide for you. And then you can just launch this download tool. And then here are the data sets. I have a few in here that have already been sent to the queue, but the two right here at the top are the two that we've just made. So impact of time docs, I just made that a couple minutes ago, and then impact of time data test. So these two are right here at the top. So you'll select whichever one you're interested in. In this case, we're interested in both. So let's just start with the docs. So we'll start with those. And you can see that those are then linked down here at the bottom. So if you were interested, let's say you changed your mind, you were only interested in, let's say, the data collection tool, right? You could just download that. Let's just download everything. Then we can go to download options and we'll just download to the computer and hit download. Let me just go to my little test space here so we can save that. And then we would just do the same exact thing for the data itself. We've got those two data sets, download to computer, download, and let's go ahead and just put that in the same spot. It says it has a pop-up here. Your download has started. If there are errors, they will appear in the package contents table. When your download is finished, you remove the package by clicking remove packages. So that's something. Here we could remove them. So that way we can keep this nice and clean, especially if you feel like you're going to be working across many data sets and aggregating them. Just to keep this nice and tight, we can remove these packages when we're done with them. So I can remove those. So now it's nice and clean. These are just the two that we're working with today left. I'll just open these up. You guys can take a look. The data collection tool, for example. Right? So the actual tool that was used for this study, you can look through it and see what the process was for collecting the data. Of course, you have the data elements in here, but we also have the code book, which is extremely useful when it comes to understanding the variables. So there we have the collection tool. Here is the data dictionary. So the code book. In this case, these users use REDCap. So here's the kind of a REDCap where we have the variable names as well as things like the permissible values for how questions could be answered. Right, so you have that available. And then you have the protocol itself. If you are interested in things like what the study summary, right, background, significance, objectives, aims, and then probably really importantly is things like the study design, right? Inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. Very important when we're doing analyses, we understand who is included in this data set. So that's all the documentation. And then likewise, we would then be able to then understand the data set itself. Now that we understand the code book, we understand the protocol of how the data was collected, we can then make an understanding of the different variables in the data set. So very straightforward, very simple. The hardest thing, honestly, is getting the data access request documentation filled out and submitted. Once you're actually into the system, it's super user friendly of just going to the data store and going into the study you're interested in and going straight to the documentation and the data. It's right there for you. So that is accessing data. And then on the other side, how did the data that I'm showing you get in there, right? How to submit data. So submit a data submission request form. That form was right next to the data access request form. Essentially, this will be the data submitter information about your research project, and then of course getting IRB approval for submitting the data to the system. Once you have that all submitted, and then you'd log into the system, navigate to the data store, that same module we were just in. And then you would select create data store and then fill out the required fields, things like a study summary, abstract, aims, things like that, and then attach your study documents. Again, very straightforward, pretty simple. And I will now show you how to do that once again in the actual NTRR. So you would again fill out your document, your data submission request found on the public site under Get an Account. You'd fill this out very similar to the previous one I showed you. Um, the right page here. Very similar, right? Who's submitting the data? Again, it might be the PI or it might be a data manager that you have that's submitting the data. So it's whoever's submitting the data goes here. You have the ability to then add the PI's information, of course, as well. Research project title, IRB approval, signing official, right? Essentially the same components of the last document I shared. Again, then the ability to add more users. If you have more than one person on your team that's going to be managing the data or submitting the data, then you can add them here. Again, if they're from your institution, you can just add as many people as you want from your institution that can all submit the same document. A different institution requires a separate data submission form. So once that's submitted and you've requested your account, then let's jump into the actual system here. Just go back home, right? All of our modules, our building blocks, go to the data store. And it is really, really simple. So you'll on the left-hand side here, just go to Create Data Store. And there's going to be a list of things that are required and some that aren't. So first being what resource are you submitting to? So as I've mentioned, we have the TBI and we have the NTRR living together. So we would be submitting to the NTRR. Is this a study or a meta-analysis? So a meta-analysis being you've pulled together different data sets from different studies already, and now you want that, you want that to have some place to live, compared to no, this was a study that you completed and it's the data directly from that one single study. A title, I'm just going to put some test information in here. So you put your title, your abstract, your aims, participation status. This is whether you're required to submit your data to the NTRR or whether you're submitting it voluntarily. Currently with the FitBur repository, there are certain users that, depending on their funding device, are actually required to submit to FitBur. So mainly NIH, DoD funded TBI studies. Not all of them, but the majority of them are required to submit to FitBur. There isn't anything in place right now for NTRR, but we expect that the DoD would like to kind of mirror what FitBur has been doing. So we expect that to happen in the future, is that federally funded trauma studies would be required to submit to the NTRR as well. So we'll just put volunteer for now. What type of study? Meta-analysis, prospective, retrospective. What different types of studies? We have a kind of a drop down here, observational, clinical. So we'll just make a selection. And then the rest of these are optional. So if you have a study URL, let's say you're a big research group and you want others to be able to look at what your research group is doing, you could add that here. Or if you have study publications, and you could provide the links to those publications here as well. So I'll go down to the bottom here and just hit continue. You can add more specifications about what type of study your study is there at the bottom. And then now we're just going to add who's a part of your research team, who's a part of this team that's going to be either one submitting the data or is just a member of the team that you'd like to be acknowledged and information would be provided in the system for other users to see. In this case, I'll leave myself as kind of the data manager. It does require that you have a primary investigator. Again, doesn't have to be the person that's submitting the data, but needs to be the PI for the study. So that way that information is added and clear. Michelle, if it's okay, I'm going to add you. So that would be that information here. So you would submit that for your PI, and then you could, of course, then add more users as well. Other people who happen to be working with the data. The only other thing required on this page is just what is your funding source. So we have all different types, mainly DoD, AHRQ, lots of NIH, as you can see, PCORI, as well as other. So I'll select, let's say it's a PCORI study. All that's required is the study, and then you can add other information here if you prefer. If you have a clinical trial ID table, that can get added here, as well as grant-specific information can get added here. Or if you have any other DOIs that you want to be referenced, those can get added here. And then you also have the ability to add things like keywords. So if a user was interested in trying to search through the repository for a particular type of study and you wanted it to be kind of flagged, you could add keywords here as well for your study. So we will create and finish. And now this is created for you to now start adding in your documentation and your data. If you look on the left-hand side, you'll see it's in draft status. So this is something that's created, but only users who have submitted accounts to have access to this data would be able to see that this is available. Other users wouldn't see it yet because it hasn't been published yet. It's still in this draft stage. So here's where when we'd then be able to go in and add documentation. Or data, right? You can see here there's nothing yet because we haven't added it. So you, the user, would just go to Edit Data Store. Now that it's been made, we need to edit it. And we can go to Documentation. And then here's where we can add our documentation, whether that be our protocol, our data dictionary, or so on. So I'll just throw in a document of a protocol. So let's say this is our protocol. Protocol. And we can save that. And again, you could add any other documents that you wanted here, and we can just hit continue. And then now we can get to the data itself. We can upload from a file. We can choose files. Again, throw in some test data here. Test data. It's as simple as clicking load. And then you do have to fill out some information down here about what type of data this is. So the data type, you can get one of these drop downs. Data category, other raw data results, software, saved query. We'll talk about queries in the future. This comes down to querying data sets in the system. You're only able to query from the data repository. When it comes to data sets that are in the data store, your options for analyzing are downloading it like we just did in our previous demo, downloading them locally, and then analyzing them how you would wish with whichever data software you'd like to use. But when it comes to the data repository, you can actually create queries in the NTRR itself to pre-query the data. And then a description. Save those. And then I will just click it and upload the files. And that data is ready to get added. As soon as we hit save and finish, then that's going to get added to your data store. Go ahead and save those changes. And now we're back it's still in draft stage, but now we're kind of back at the home page for this data store. And when we go to documentation, we can see that there's the protocol. And when we go to data, there's the data. So from here, it would be up to the user then to determine, hey, are you ready for it to be published? Everything's there, everything's good to go. You've added all your documentation, all your data. Then you would request publication and it gets sent to me. I would have been working with you and making sure you had any questions as you go through this process. But then I get pinged and then I'll just review it and make sure that everything looks good. Isn't any missing information, and then I'll publish it. At that point, I actually think you get a DOI before that. Yeah, so you've already this study's already then been assigned a DOI. So again, then when any user wants to access this data, one, you'll be notified. Two, if they then want to publish anything on this, they're required to cite your DOI as well. So again, I think pretty straightforward. We're trying to make this super user friendly. It's a completely free resource. That's the kind of point, is to leverage these data sets, make them available for users, so that there is so much value in especially some of these really large data sets that are just too large for one team to potentially break down, because there's just so many questions that can come out of them. So with that, we'll open it up to a Q&A, and then I just have a couple of links to share at the end. So I don't know if there's been any questions posted in chat during, or Michelle, you want to jump in, see where we
Um,
are?
Not so far. The link that you posted is there, of course. If anybody needs to get the link to access the NIH site. So we'd be happy to take questions from the group. You made it sound so simple and look so simple, Nick. I don't know, there may not be any questions.
Yeah, that's our goal here, right? Is to just make it super user friendly. Again, ideally the most difficult part is just getting that documentation filled out and submitted. Um, but yeah, we're trying to make it super user friendly.
I did have one comment while we're waiting to see if there are any questions. That unique digital object identifier that you receive when you upload your data to the repository, you can, of course, use that to report back to your funding agency, like to show that you complied with your data sharing agreement. I've also seen where investigators will include it in whatever section of the CV makes sense for their institution, that they created this unique data set for secondary analyses. And like Nick said, um, anybody who does secondary analyses with one of these data sets agrees at the front end that they will cite that DOI in any publications they have.
I did want to add, thanks, Michelle. I did want to add that whenever a data accessor does submit the request, that request is reviewed by a data access committee that's built up of DoD as well as NIH members. So we've gotten a lot of questions regarding, well, like, how do I make sure that the right people are accessing my data? So we do have a protocol and a process for that to ensure that, this person has the right credentials, they've gotten their, institution's approval, and, they're using the data in the way that it's been being intended to be analyzed and used. Not just somebody off the street can just pull your data out.
I don't see anything else in the chat.
All right. Well, if there's no questions, I wanted to share a couple more resources. So
Mhm.
first of all, we're also, of course, interested in your data. We're constantly working with PIs who are interested in having some place for their data to live. As Michelle mentioned, um, a lot of funders are now requiring you to make sure that your data has somewhere that it can live and be accessible. So this is a great source for that. So that's one. And then two, here we have all the links to all of the sites that we've been going through today. So our main site here at the top, ntrr.nih.gov. As mentioned, we are housed at NIH, work very closely with them on the development of this system. We do have all of the videos to the previous webinars. So if you feel like maybe we didn't cover something in depth today, but you saw, you're interested in learning more about what we covered in the past, those are available for you here. And then, as I've mentioned earlier, that if you're interested in accessing this data and taking a look at it, or doing further analysis with it, we have a link there directly to the submitted data as well that I shared earlier. All of this is available on our public site and with a QR code here. Again, this is the public site where you have access to all of this, and then you that would then need to create an account to actually get into the NTRR itself to look at the actual protocols and data sets. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Again, my name is Nick. I'm the operations manager. So if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out. Or if this information is helpful to you, or you feel like you have other colleagues where this may be a good resource for them, please do feel free to share. I also added Pam Bixby, who's our Center Deputy Director, who helps a lot on this project. You may have been getting many emails from her, so I provided her information there as well. And thank you all so much for taking the time to join with us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everybody. Take care.